Good afternoon, everyone. We are waiting for a few seconds before we admit everyone into the room.
Okay.
Excellent. We'll get started. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this information webinar. We realize that most of you have received this invitation not a long time ago, so we really appreciate your flexibility and the time that you take to be here today and learn more about this project. My name is Florence Touré. I am the Director of Project Delivery within Colleges and Institutes Canada. Some housekeeping items before we get started. I wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded and will be made available to all of you, and as well as anyone who were not able to attend the webinar today. Please feel free to share the recorded information to any of your colleagues who might be interested in the project. And also, you all have been muted to participate in the session, but once we get to the Q&A section, we invite you to turn your microphone on again if you have any questions. We also invite you to use the chat box at any time to ask questions during the presentation or provide any comments. And my colleague Joël Deschambault will be monitoring the chat. So the purpose of today's session is to provide some information about an innovative work-integrated learning project based on virtual simulations that Colleges and Institutes Canada, CICan, will be launching in the next few weeks. The Virtu-WIL project, as we call it, will create valuable new resources for students in healthcare programs at publicly supported colleges and universities throughout Canada. You will see that there are two ways that educators and institutions can be involved in the project, and we'll speak about it a bit more in a bit more details shortly. So you can help us create the virtual simulations and design the program that will make them available to students by being part of our working groups and advisory committees. And you can also make the program and the simulations available to your students by becoming a delivery institution. There will be funding in the project budget for institutions to support both activities. We will be launching a formal call for expression of interest in the next few weeks that will include more detailed information about these opportunities and how to apply. So today, we really wanted to provide you with an overview of the project and answer any questions you may have before we launch the call. And actually, your questions will help us finalize the call for expressions of interest. So please do not hesitate to share your comments and first impressions on the project, on the proposed project. So what is the Virtu-WIL project? The project will provide a work-integrated learning opportunities for healthcare students in colleges and universities using virtual simulations. And we will learn a bit more about what we call virtual simulations in a few minutes. The program will be targeting 3 program areas: nursing, so all of the nursing program entry to practice, the medical lab technology, and the paramedicine discipline. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay. The virtual simulations that will be created as part of this program will be offered to students in the form of a mini program that can be integrated as part of their studies or done as a supplementary activity. So the virtual work-integrated learning program will require the completion of several simulations, and the number of those simulations and the way it will be made available to students will be defined by a working group. And we will also engage a structured interaction with medical partners or employers to provide some debrief and pre-brief and debrief about the simulation experience. In total, we expect that about 4,000 students will participate in the program, and they will each receive a $250 stipend for the successful completion of the project, of their program. So I would like to introduce some of the organizations who are involved in the project to briefly introduce themselves. And I will start by introducing Colleges and Institutes Canada in case you're not familiar with our organization. So Colleges and Institutes Canada, or CICan, is the national and international voice of Canada's publicly supported colleges, institutes of technology, CEGEPs, polytechnics, and universities with a college mandate. We work with government, industry, and international partners to champion employment-focused post-secondary education that benefits learners and contributes to growing and prosperous communities. We have members from across the country, and in a recent study, we determined that 95% of the Canadian population live within 50 kilometers of a learning center of one of our members, and 86% of Indigenous communities also live within 50 kilometers of a college or institute learning center. Now I would like to introduce you to Simulation Canada, who will be the main partner on this program. And we have Tim Willett, the CEO of Simulation Canada, who can say a few words to introduce his organization.
Thank you, Florence. I think many on the call know me and know Simulation Canada, but for those who don't, my name's Tim Willett. I'm the president and CEO. Simulation Canada is the nonprofit network of healthcare simulation centers and personnel across Canada. We work across all professions. We work across all sectors, so college, universities, and healthcare delivery agencies, to advance simulation and advocate for its expansion to improve education, to improve healthcare delivery, and to improve patient safety.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. We are also working with 3 associations that have helped shape the project so far and will be and also provided letters of support for the introduction of this project. We have the Canadian Association of Schools of Nursing, and I see Cynthia Baker who is here today. Do you want to introduce the organization in a few words?
Okay, yeah, so yes, yes, I'm Cynthia Baker, from the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Schools of Nursing. Our members are all of the schools of nursing across the country that offer baccalaureate and or graduate programs in nursing. So many of our schools are in the colleges that we've just been, that you know, that are being represented by the lead organization. And our mandate is to promote high quality nursing education in Canada. And with the introduction of the pandemic, we have been very much promoting and fostering the development of virtual simulations for the schools of nursing in the country. So thanks. And we're happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. We are also working with the Canadian Society for Medical Laboratory Science. I don't know if we have maybe Christine. Yes. Hello.
Yeah. Hi there, Christine Nielsen, CEO for the Canadian Society for Medical Laboratory Science. We are so excited to see this project come to fruition. We're a huge supporter of simulation for both an enhancement to learning, but also for the potential to sign off on clinical-based objectives. And so it's really important that CSMLS encourage our educators to be involved in this project. We're also involved as a lead accreditation sponsor to make sure that we have suitable clinical placements as well as a didactic in place for high quality education, just like Cynthia said. So just very happy to see this project moving, and so happy to be working with CICan and Sim Canada.
Thank you very much, Christine. And we're also working with the Paramedic Association of Canada. Do we have a representative from PAC present today? Maybe not. So the PAC's mission is to provide quality care for the public through leadership in advancement of the professional paramedicine. They have about 20,000 members from across Canada. Their current initiatives include the renewal of national occupational competency profile and development of national examination a national registry. So as part of the project, we will obviously involve a number of virtual simulation suppliers who will be selected by means of a request for proposals that will be launched very soon. And of course, we will have educators, post-secondary institutions that will be involved along with their clinical partners and their students. So the rationale for this program is based on a situation that we are all familiar with. During COVID, all post-secondary institutions worked really hard to come up with virtual learning options for their students, including ways to provide students with innovative workplace experience. This comes on top of long-standing challenges securing clinical placement for students in healthcare programs. And this has been even made worse as a result of pressure on the healthcare system since the beginning of the pandemic. So the concept also recognizes that in-person clinical placement have limits in terms of what students are able to do in a clinical placement and during their limited period of time in a workplace or clinical setting. In addition, in-person placement will always be important. So we want to make sure that the simulation will not replace the clinical placement. We recognize the importance of in-person placements, but the simulation will be a good complement and can decrease time to competency and enhance students' learning experience. Many of you are already using in-person simulations in labs for many years, but even these have been hard to access in the past year, and they have their own limitations in terms of the cost and the number of students who can access them at the same time. Over the past years, we have seen an increased use of computer-based virtual simulations. Not surprisingly, these have generated a lot of interest over the past year, and Simulation Canada has been at the center of the efforts to make more of them available, and we're very pleased to have them as a main partner on this project. Now, one of the interesting things about virtual simulations is that they can be shared between institutions in a way that a mannequin or in-person simulation lab cannot be. As long as you have a computer and access to the internet, you will be able to access them from anywhere. That creates an opportunity for institutions to collaborate in creating and sharing these resources that can not only significantly lower costs, but also create a community of practice and opportunities from cross-institutional learning. And we are very pleased, as national associations, organizations like CICan and Simulation Canada, and our 3 partners to help facilitate opportunities for these collaborations to happen. We can see often that we can access those funding that individual institutions will not be able to access individually. So we are pleased to have this convener role in that matter. So some of you, as I mentioned, are already using virtual simulations, but we thought it would be good to provide a brief explanation of what it is, and I will invite Tim again to present the different type of simulations that we will experience in this project.
Thank you, Florence. If there's anything I've learned over the past year, it's that virtual simulations, despite having been around for about 20 years, are growing exponentially. They're just exploding. And also that the term virtual simulation can mean very different things to very different people. So it's important that we clarify what we're talking about up front. For the sake of this project, we're defining a virtual simulation as a clinical simulation experience that runs on a computer and is accessed by a 2-dimensional screen. It may perhaps also be accessible by a virtual reality headset, but for this project, we're talking specifically about screen-based simulations. So even VR type of simulations need to be accessible on a 2D screen. In these simulations, students encounter a clinical situation. They need to investigate it, make decisions, and receive feedback on their performance. In the literature and in other work, these may be referred to as virtual patients, screen-based simulations, virtual clinical experiences, or virtual labs. So I want to point out that that's distinct from virtual reality, again, unless VR is also accessible by a 2D screen or using something like Google Cardboard. And it's also different than live simulations run virtually, like over Zoom, which is also called telesimulation. Next slide, please, Florence. The scope of virtual simulations can actually be quite broad from the cognitive perspective, and this is the most prevalent use of virtual simulations that we see for allowing students to practice and to develop their clinical reasoning skills and their clinical decision-making skills. But there are virtual patient or virtual simulation platforms that can also be used for learning procedures. Again, the cognitive aspects of procedures, such as the indications, contraindications, risks, materials that you need, steps of the procedure, can be covered quite well. Obviously, the psychomotor aspect of them can't be. And this would include lab techniques as well for those joining us from medical lab technology. More and more, we see virtual patients also addressing non-technical skills, such as communication and social-emotional skills, such as empathy and ethics. And finally, there are virtual simulations that are capable of promoting interprofessional learning, either synchronously or asynchronously, by bringing students together, either from one profession or from multiple professions for interprofessional learning. Broadly speaking, we see various architectures or various types of virtual simulations. At the more basic end are linear simulations, which really are just kind of cases that students can work through to consolidate their knowledge. As the case progresses, they're asked questions and provided more information. They have to answer the questions, they get feedback on their answers, but ultimately those answers don't change the course of the case. Perhaps the most common type that we see is the branching type of scenario, where a student is presented with information and then they have a short list, perhaps 3 to 5 choices to make. And the choice they make affects how the case unfolds. It takes them to the next node where they get more information. But as they go from node to node, the choices they make affect how the case progresses. And they might end up in different endpoints. And again, they get feedback on their performance. The branching cases, a lot of them can be quite successful just with text and image support. Often they're supplemented with videos, but that's not always necessary. There are exploratory types of virtual simulations which aim to reflect the open-endedness of a lot of clinical encounters. When you meet a patient or a situation, you're not presented with a list of options. You have to decide, what information do I need? What questions am I going to ask? What tests am I going to order or look for? What am I going to assess? And then you have to collect that information and analyze it in order to come up with a decision. And that decision may be the next step in your management process. It might be a next step in a procedure. It might be a diagnosis, but ultimately you have to compile this information, analyze it, and make a decision to get feedback on that decision. Interactive videos are becoming more possible too, through a couple of platforms that allow you to take a video and actually put in pause points in the video where students have to either collect more information or again answer a question. Interactive videos can be built as linear virtual patients, or they can be built as branching virtual patients using some newer technologies. Next slide, please. And I'll say that those 4 that I just covered, for the sake of this project, are likely to be by far the more prevalent type of virtual simulations we do, because they can be quite effective for addressing specific learning objectives and are relatively easy to design and to author compared to some of these other ones. There are responsive type of virtual simulations, which aim to combine the features of the exploratory type and the branching type, in the sense that they're open-ended. You meet a patient and the notion is you can do almost anything you want, but the patient also responds in real time to what you do. These are often used in acute care and critical care scenarios so that you can make a decision or perform an intervention and see its impact right away. But they can be quite complicated to program. There are communication types of simulations which are meant specifically for practicing communication. A lot of these are powered by natural language processing and artificial intelligence, which allow you to essentially converse with whether it's a patient or a colleague or a family member or someone else, practice having a conversation and gathering information or providing information that way. There are certain platforms developed specifically for learning procedures. Again, all the cognitive aspects of the procedures, and they're built in a way to optimize learning about procedures. Again, very limited what they can do in terms of the psychomotor development, but the cognitive aspect they certainly can address. And finally, any of these platform types could also be built to enable collaborative learning, where students either asynchronously or synchronously work through a case together and have to combine their finding and combine their ideas in order to come up with a plan. Next slide, please. We don't have time today on this webinar to go through examples of each of these, but I'd encourage you to visit the Simulation Canada website, and we have a page at sim1.ca/virtual that lists all the virtual simulation platforms we've been able to identify and link to them. Many of them offer free cases to try out, but you'll be able to see the diversity of different platforms that are available. And as Florence mentioned, in parallel to the call for expressions of interest from schools, we will also be having a call for an RFP process for suppliers, whether they're from the academic sector, nonprofit, or commercial sector, suppliers of virtual simulation solutions, so that we can identify which platforms we'll be developing on and building cases for as part of this project. So for anyone in here who comes from a virtual simulation supplier, please look out for more information coming very soon from CICan and from Simulation Canada about that.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tim, for this explanation. It makes it very clear to see the diversity of the simulations we are talking about on this project. So now we will find out how you can get involved as educators as part of this project. So as part of the project, we have enough funding to cover, to develop approximately 120 virtual simulations in the 3 program areas. So the first task will be to figure out what your priorities are. Where are they most needed, and which clinical competencies are best suited to using virtual simulations? So as a first step, Simulation Canada is preparing a survey that will be sent to all of you. And this will also be a chance for you to let us know about the virtual simulations that you're already using, the ones that exist, and the ones that could be improved, including by creating equivalent versions in other official languages, on the other official language. So if they're available in English, they could be translated in French and vice versa. We are also interested to know about your experience working with a specific type of platforms, your feedback and any recommendations you may have. So be in the lookout for the survey that will be released soon. So the second way to participate and get involved in the project is to respond to a call for expression of interest that will be launched soon by CICan. The development of simulation scenarios will be done by educators who can apply to get involved, and in partnership with the suppliers that Tim mentioned. So we have broken down the work into 3 different blocks. The first block is all about the simulation design and development. So what we are envisioning is the creation of a working group. So we will have about 3 or 4 working groups working mostly within the 3 program areas. Each of the educators involved in the project will likely be tasked to take the lead on a couple of simulations from A to Z, working with the suppliers and CICan Canada. The working group will also be working closely with experts on equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and decolonization, who will be selected through the call for expression of interest to ensure that the scenarios developed are inclusive of as many clinical situations as possible. The second block is about the student program design. So we will need some advice through this project to describe how institutions can get involved in designing and learning the program, how we will reach out to the clinical partners, the student tracking, etc. So it's a lot of moving pieces to launch this project for 4,000 students. So we'll need your support in designing the program. And the last block is the program delivery. So any institution can get involved in the delivery. You don't have to be part of the block 1 or block 2 to deliver the program. In fact, we would welcome as many delivery institutions as possible to be able to offer it to the 4,000 students. So as we mentioned, there will be funding available as part of the overall budget to cover mostly the release time of the educators involved, but more details will be available through the call for expression of interest that will be launched very soon. So now the timeline of this program. As you can see from this slide, it's the timeline is pretty ambitious, but based on the consultation we've had so far, we're confident that there's a lot of interest and support, and the simulation will fill a very big gap in the resources that you're able to offer to your students. So we are optimistic that you will take part of this program and we'll be able to deliver it within the time that we have. For now, the budget is available the funding is available throughout this fiscal year. So from April this year to the end of March next year. And within that period of time, the first couple of steps this month is really to continue our consultation and information session process. We will release the survey, the call for expressions of interest for the educators in parallel to the RFP to the suppliers, the simulation suppliers. And next month, we will actually start the work with the creation of the working group and the actual selection and development of the simulations. But most of the development will be done throughout the summer. So we will develop the scenarios, the simulation, and the design of the Virtu-WIL student program before the end of the summer for a soft launch and pilot starting at the end of August and September with selected delivery platforms. The bulk of the simulations will be available towards the end of the fall until the end of March for the large implementation. We will also collect information, evaluation, lessons learned, because this is a pilot. This is the first of its kind for CICan, so we want to collect your experience as part of this project. So this reaches the end of the presentation, and as we mentioned, we left some time today to really hear from you about the project, and we will open things to question. I will ask my colleague Joël if there's any questions already in the chat box, but we also invite you to raise your hand and ask any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florence and Tim. We do have two questions at this moment, and there's more entering. So I will start with the first one from Tino Villatoro, and he's asking, it sounds like the goal is to develop a cohesive program as opposed to numerous discrete simulations. Will there be overall program goals, outcomes developed, and appropriate design and sequencing of simulation to reach these?
A good question. Absolutely. It's the goal, as we mentioned earlier, is to foster collaborations between the different institutions and partnership with the developers. So there will be common goals to reach as part of this program. The goal is to increase the availability of resources to students as virtual simulations, and enhance students' experience in a learning experience within the healthcare system. We also want to foster the collaboration with medical partners in providing feedback on the use of those simulations. And I would invite Tim, if you wanted to add anything, or Christine Trotzman-Dobbs.
Oh, sure. I think one thing to note is we're not trying to create a curriculum here. So the 120 simulations, we're not trying to create sets that are meant to replace a nursing course or a paramedicine course. They are going to be discrete simulations that could be used individually. But the goal of the Virtu-WIL student program would be to package several of these. I say several, and we don't know what number, but you know, a few of them, 5, 6, I don't know, but to package them together into a learning experience that's valuable to students, make sure that's coupled with an effective pre-brief and debrief, and have the students enrolled so that they can get recognition as being part of the Virtu-WIL program and get their stipend for it too. So, so no, we're not looking at building a cohesive curriculum. We are looking at individual simulations that are meant to support educators, and that educators can use the ones that they need to use for their students. And the Virtu-WIL package will provide a way, and Florence, correct me if you're if I'm misstating this, but will almost provide a way of packaging some of those together into a student experience.
Absolutely.
And maybe I can just add a little bit to that. And I think Florence talked about Block 2 and the advisory group that's going to help design that program. I think this is exactly the kind of question that second group is going to weigh in on. But I think it's relatively easy to imagine that out of the pool of simulations that's created, that any given educator will select the ones that are sort of most appropriate to their students' needs in that semester. If it's a second-year program, they might look at a different bundle than a first-year program. That's going to be, we're going to try and create as much choice as possible for the individual institutions to match their student needs or their local employers' needs to the selection of simulations available for that program area.
Thank you. I just want to mention, because I see there's a many comment about receiving the presentation or receiving the recording. So be assured everybody that is on the webinar or registered will be receiving both the PowerPoint and the recording. So maybe another question from Gary Hart is asking, will you consider virtual patient cases available only in English without a French version?
So the overall goal of the program is really to have bilingual resources. Now, to say that each simulation will be translated in the other language is not necessarily the case. There could be simulations that will be developed in French and others will be developed in English, but in the end, we want to have as many French simulations as English simulations. We will also welcome the opportunities to be translating and adapting some of the existing simulations in the other language.
Thank you.
Tim, did you want to add something?
No, I agree. It really depends on the needs of the francophones versus the anglophones that are involved in this, and where there are common needs. Things can be done in both languages. When a resource exists that's strong in one language and therefore, you know, is not something that needs to be developed under this project, but an equivalent doesn't exist under the other language, then either recreating, refilming, or translating in the other language is certainly an option. And this ties in nicely to another question I saw about whether it's only English and French being considered, or whether there's a possibility that resources could be translated into an indigenous language.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think we are open to explore those opportunities, and we'd love to talk more about this opportunity. That would be a great project to take on.
Yes, indeed. Also, I want just to ask people, if you want to raise your hand, you can also take the floor and ask your question. I will keep reading some of the questions that we have in the chat, but please don't hesitate if you want to ask your question in person. We have a question from Jamie Coleman. While the focus is on the 3 disciplines, nursing, labs, and paramedicine, is there an opportunity for other disciplines to apply, to be involved? Specifically here, he's talking about physiotherapy. Simulation is emerging in physiotherapy and would have a large impact on physical therapy education.
No, that's also an interesting question, and we had that. We asked ourselves that question while we were designing the concept for this project. And what we did is we look at the needs, the number of students that will be benefiting this project, and we landed on the 3 disciplines here. But keep in mind that this is a pilot project that will serve as collecting important lessons for possible extension to this program. As I mentioned, this is a 1-year program for now. Should there be an extension or a possibility to include more discipline, I think we will be open to explore those opportunities.
Thank you. We do have a lot of questions, so I will keep reading. Will there be a cost for the use of simulation? Can you speak more to what students will be doing as part of the work integrated program? I think that's a really interesting question.
Absolutely. So there won't be any cost to the students for the use of the simulations. We want to make sure that CICan receive funding not only to allow the educators to participate in the development of those simulations, but we will also pay for the development from the vendors, the platform suppliers' perspective, so that there's no cost for the students. In fact, they will receive a stipend of $250 to participate in the program. So the way in which the students will be engaged in the program will be defined in detail during the block 2 of the project, but essentially the idea is for have each student take part in 4 or 5 simulations each and receive feedback from an employer or medical partner in their field to discuss the choice of their choices in the decision making within the simulation.
Thank you, Florence. Another question, and maybe just before we continue, to say that we will also reply to these questions in the FAQ on the website, or provide answer in writing as well. So is the audience for the completed virtual simulation specifically students only, or others such as clinical instructors? So
maybe I should have said it in the beginning, but this project is funded under Employment and Social Development in Canada, so the federal government's department in charge of employment and competencies, under the Innovative Work Integrated Learning Fund program. So it's all about providing students with opportunities to engage with employers And this fund was specifically around innovative work integrated learning opportunities. That's why this project will be available to students as a priority and as part of this project.
I see there's a hand risen, just a minute. Mr. Foubert.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question about the development process for the simulations. Is it reasonable for an institution that can develop the simulations in-house to apply and under the expression of interest?
So there are two things. So there is the engagement of the post-secondary institutions to take part in the program, but as part of the RFP that goes out to the suppliers, post-secondary institutions are also eligible to apply as part of the RFP to develop the simulation in-house. So I think yes.
Oh no, I really appreciate the clarification. Thank you. It's great to understand the paths there. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think a big part of this will too depend on accessibility at the end of the project. And scalability. So we're going to be a preference towards platforms where, even after the end of this project, or if it gets renewed and expanded, there'll be growing capacity to be able to develop and author more and publish more simulations, as opposed to simulations that are built, published, and then kind of locked in. As it were, and not able to be accessed for modification or repurposing.
Well said, Tim. And I would just advise as well integrations into learning management systems and other things used at the educational institutions, also very important to consider. And thank you.
In parallel with this, we're doing some research into the open education world and policies around that. We know that with some virtual simulation programs or platforms and technologies, it's simply not possible to publish them as open education resources. That's not to say those aren't options, because we are looking into technologies that things can be made free, as in, but even if not open, but still even some of the scenarios and assets that are developed as part of this could be published as open resources, even if the final complete scenario is made free but not open, if that makes any sense.
No,
yes,
it
right.
integration does. I think many of us on the call have seen something from eCampus in the past few months in Ontario, and that also raised a few questions about the distribution afterwards, after the end of that project, which also worth considering. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. There's a question here that we touch a little bit in the presentation. There are common competencies irrespective of profession education. Is this being taken into account?
Tim, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So as the working groups come together, their first task will be to define what scenarios they need simulations for, what clinical competencies. And we'll be working, CICan, Simulation Canada, and a couple others will be working across these groups, both to advise and help them come to that decision, but also to identify where those commonalities occur. And in some situations, yes, there's common competencies. So there'll be opportunities for I'll call them multi-professional simulations. And by that, I mean uni-professional simulations that are applicable to more than one profession, and therefore developers from two or more professions could work together to either make a scenario that's applicable to both professions, or slightly different versions, like the same scenario script, but one filmed in a home and one filmed in an ambulance, in order to be applicable to both. The other opportunity, and there was a question about this too, is for interprofessional simulations, where students from different professions actually actively learn with, from, and about each other in a simulation. And again, we'll be looking out for those needs and opportunities and bring developers from representing multiple professions together when there is a demand for that kind of scenario. But ultimately, what scenarios will be developed or translated or found and made available for free are really going to depend on the needs and priorities as identified by these working groups.
Thank you, Tim. One question here. Having participated in scenario sim development on a previous project back in 2014 to create the repository of sims, I believe it's now housed by CanSim. How will this process be similar or different to that process? So this is a question from Catherine Lakehead.
So I'm not too familiar with the repository of sims with the Ontario project. Tim, are you?
Yeah, so Simulation Canada, back when we were Sim1, was involved in that too. And there certainly are some parallels in the sense that as a group, they'll be defining what situations, what simulations are needed. We'll be dividing, so every school that participates will be responsible likely for leading the development of 2 of the scenarios, and at the end they'll be pooled for use by everyone and others participating in the Virtu-WIL student project, part of this project, even if they aren't participating in the development part.
Thank you, Tim. We also have a question more about the process. So how long will school have to respond to the expression of interest, the call for expression of interest?
So we typically give between 10 and 15 business days to respond to the call for expression of interest, so to 2 to 3 weeks, I would say.
Thank you. Tammy is asking, will these partners have professional development to do the debriefings, feedback? So I believe, Tammy, you're talking about the clinical partners?
Yes, it's Tammy, that's correct. So if they're going into the clinical agencies and they're doing these VSIMs, who's going to debrief them? And will these people also get some kind of development? Because you just can't throw anybody into debriefing. There should be some type of education done along with that.
Absolutely. This is a part of the program. We will be developing some tools and resources for everyone involved, for the educators that are delivering the program, as well as the medical partners who will provide feedback. So we'll prepare some debriefing guide for the employers and run them through, provide them with some sort of training. And Tim, did you want to add to that?
No, just that, so there'll be 2 aspects to professional development as part of this. Some professional development for the developing groups and teams around authoring cases and standards for and quality expectations for their development. I saw there was a question earlier about the Anaxel standards. So including but not limited to the Anaxel standards for best practice, we'll be doing some training around case development and production, and then a second phase of faculty development around implementation and the skills needed to brief and debrief, to make sure, just like you said, Tammy, that we don't have people coming in with no simulation, no debriefing experience at all being expected to contribute to debriefing of these.
That's great. Thanks very much, Tim.
Maybe going back to this question about the if we will be using the International Nursing Association for clinical simulation and learning standards of best practice for simulation as we begin the project.
Yeah, so all the professional development that Simulation Canada does is rooted in existing standards and best practices. As you know, the Anaxel standards, I've been actually part of a group that's been reviewing them recently. They will certainly inform the standards and the expectations for these simulations. In the case of virtual simulations, Anaxel does not yet have one on virtual simulations per se, as it's a very rapidly emerging field, although many of the standards around quality and briefing and debriefing and psychological safety are perfectly transferable to the virtual simulation environment. So yes, standards such as those and other emerging evidence will be informing the work that we do.
Thank you, Tim. Now a question from Anne Mickinis, more on the virtual program for the students. So how will the students be selected?
Right, so that's a question that will be answered as part of the work done by the block 2, so the program design phase.
Yes.
Maybe we just add that Florence has made a couple of references to the fact that we have the stipend included in the budget is money to provide up to 4,000 students with a $250 stipend, but we don't see that as limiting ultimately the number of students who can use the simulations or take part in this program. And so that Block 2 working group will be part of a discussion about how those stipends should be allocated, assuming that there are more students than stipends available. And we do have a strong commitment to make sure that students who are coming from underrepresented groups or who are disadvantaged, who have different barriers to access, that they are certainly fully included in the program, both in terms of the simulations that are provided, that they're accessible and that they're relevant to their needs, and that they're available. I think Tim talked a little bit earlier in terms of the technology, the idea that we're going with just the two-dimensional screen simulations, that we recognize that there's some sort of geographic or Wi-Fi access barriers to access in some cases. And then there's certainly more subtle barriers to access for groups of students who might not normally have available to them this kind of resource.
Thank you, Christine, for the precision. There is also a question about, we touched base a little bit about that, post-pilot, what will happen to the sims? Will they be available and will there be a cost after the project is over?
Right, so this is a big question that we are currently discussing, because we want certainly the sims to be available for as long as possible in the partner platform. In terms of the IP, the simulation developed will belong to CICan, so we want to make sure also that we can make them available as open as possible to the post-secondary education system. But this will be clarified in the call for expression of interest, and in the RFP. We are still figuring out specifically on that question.
Thank you, merci Florence. Maybe we can talk a little bit about where the FAQ will be posted, where the information will be available, how people will be receiving the RFP or the call for interest.
Absolutely. So we will be sending the call and any information via email to all of the attendants of this session, as well as everyone who showed interest in participating. But we are also building a web page at CICan to retrieve all of the information, and our partner Simulation Canada will also distribute any of those materials to their network.
Yep, look out on our listserv and our social media for that. And I believe we were also going to ask for assistance from CICan and CSMLS and PAC to make sure that their channels are aware of it too, to make sure that hopefully every educator for these professions in Canada has an opportunity to see the announcements once it's open.
Thank you, Tim. As a developer, what would be the time commitment during the summer? That's important.
It will be actually crucial. Both the bulk of the program development will occur in the summer. So depending on your on the type of simulation you're working on, it could be intensive time and effort to dedicate to the program, because the goal is to have the 120 simulations fully developed by the fall, by mid October. So this is going to be quite a busy summer for those involved.
And again, I want to emphasize too that a lot of the scenarios that have been developed recently, especially by CanSim and their colleagues, have been video based, and we don't anticipate that that will be necessary for all 120 of these. There's good evidence that you just using a strong narrative supported with either some illustrations or photos can make for a strong case when video is not necessary. If you can get all the information you need without video to show behavior or affect, then it's not necessary. So we anticipate that a lot of these cases can be built from a strong pedagogical basis, but not needing a lot of media, and therefore it's an aggressive timeline, but it's not infeasible.
Florence, I can't remember whether you mentioned the number of people that we're anticipating being part of this working group, but I think we're targeting about 60 people. So we're really trying to divide the work up into small bundles and looking for people who have some experience already doing this kind of thing, so that they can we're not starting from zero in terms of that. The other, I think Florence mentioned that is simulations that already exist in one language that could be reproduced in the second language are eligible. So that would be sort of a shorter bundle of work in many respects. And then if there are simulations out there that you like a lot of what you see, but maybe they could be improved, maybe they could be extended, maybe they could be moved, maybe there's something that you've developed in-house that you could move to one of the supplier platforms. Those two would be eligible for consideration as part of the project. I think it was Russell had asked about, the eligibility of simulations that you've got already in your, perhaps in your school that could be brought in. So we're certainly looking to impose as little as possible on your time and precious weeks over the summer by taking best advantage of all the work that has already taken place in this area.
To build on that too, there are tremendous numbers of really strong simulation scenarios that exist that were written for in-person simulations, whether mannequin-based or using SPs. And where relevant and where someone's willing to contribute that, perhaps those can also act as the basis for development as a virtual sim rather than an in-person sim and still achieve the same learning objectives. So there's efficiencies to be gained there too.
I think Sophia might be referring to the a position that you posted.
Yeah, right? So yeah. This grant has not been publicly announced by ESDC, so we are having to be a little vague in our communications. The positions you saw, the recruitment by Simulation Canada that you saw is actually to support this project. So we are recruiting a few coaches with strong experience in virtual simulations who will be available to support the groups developing as part of this project. So yes, they are related.
But the call for expression of interest will come from CICan,
yes,
and as well as them.
Yes, the call for expressions of interest for schools participating or for platform suppliers participating will be completely separate.
And we're not anticipating those that work to be full-time by any extent. And there is, as Florence mentioned, release time money budgeted in the project budget. Not that makes a difference to the people who are actually involved in it, but for the institutions to support your participation, hopefully that makes things a little easier when finances are tight.
Thank you. Russell, you wanted to add something, ask another question?
Yes, thank you. It's just in support of that notion of the perhaps intensive development timeline we've been talking about the past couple of minutes. Would it be reasonable and supported to project producing a strong, viable kind of release candidate by the end of October, that target date in October, and then kind of iterating and evolving it as it goes out and is tested and accessed by students and then evolved between like then and the end of the project? A little bit of hybrid, a little bit of agile, a little bit of waterfall.
Certainly, we are going to work in a different iteration. So we'll have a soft launch, and everything will be tested before it goes out to the students. But we will select a number of simulations and the delivery institutions in the fall to test the model and provide feedback before we launch it more broadly for the 4,000 for the remainder students.
Okay, and thank you. It would be good to look at those flexibilities, because once it goes out the door, there's often a need to kind of go and touch it up and refine it based on feedback and experience in the field. Thank you.
For sure.
I think I've covered all the questions in the chat. Please let me know if I forgot someone or missed a question.
I see one from H. Suski.
Oh, yes. Yes, okay. Will the selection of a platform include both electronic, digital, and physical components? And how could this be distributed to various geographic locations?
So, Florence, do you want me to take this?
Go ahead.
So, aligned with our vision to make these as accessible as possible, including to students in more remote locations, when we're likely to exclude any simulations that require some physical component in order to complete them. Our goal is that students would need nothing more than a computer or a phone or a tablet to be able to access these.
Thank you, Tim. So I would invite anyone who wants to ask another question to just take the floor. We still have half an hour, so still plenty of time.
Have we missed any questions from the chat? I'm just looking back. There was a question from Robert Catena. I'm not sure we responded to. I'm wondering if there is capacity to do an IPE VSIMS.
So that's the interprofessional education SIMs, and definitely.
Okay, I think that's right.
Yeah. So from the supplier standpoint, when we look at the RFPs, we'll be evaluating those as a committee, and we will be looking for at least some, if not all of those platforms to be capable of hosting interprofessional scenarios. And then on the development side, as the working groups define what simulations they need, when there are parallel simulations, or when there's the need identified from multiple groups for an interprofessional, yeah, we'd like to support that.
Well, I think there was also a question from Roger Crow about a tool to facilitate collaboration. Maybe Florence can talk about that.
Sure, and we will be using Microsoft Teams to facilitate the collaboration between the different working groups. At CICan, we are delivering a number of projects and programs, and we have experimenting MS Teams for quite a little while now, and it seems to be a very interesting tool for collaboration, interaction with the different team members. So we'll make sure that everyone involved gets some training if you're not already familiar with it. But I think by now a lot of our members have been using Teams.
Thank you. I see there's somebody who wants to speak. Go ahead. Oh. Okay, so in the meantime, there is a question from Alison Cooper. Is the plan to equally divide the 120 simulation among the 3 disciplines? For example, 40 for each discipline.
Yes, that was the idea, to divide the number of simulation per discipline. At some point, we also had a registered nurse versus practical nurse, so maybe having more in the nursing area, but this will be well divided.
I think the survey that Florence and Tim talked about earlier will be a really important sort of way to assess just how to allocate the work, or the budgets that are available for suppliers in terms of where is the demand coming from. I think there's some big differences in terms of enrollment figures across those 3 program areas, and so you want to respond to the need, both in terms of the number of students and the breadth of the the breadth of the competency needs that are reflected in each of the program areas, but it also loops back to some interesting opportunity for the interprofessional practice and perhaps some simulations that are applicable to competencies that cross over more than one program area.
And the other thing to remember too is neither Simulation Canada nor CICan has the content expertise. And we are going to be dependent on the schools that apply to be part of the development of this. And the number of simulations we can develop for any one profession may also be a reflection of the number of developers or schools. Where I say developers, I don't mean computer programmers, but educators who are willing to work with us to get those built.
Before we take another question, maybe we can expand a little bit more on the equity and diversity aspect of this project. There was someone mentioning that she really likes the focus on equity and diversity and inclusion. So maybe just to explain how we intend to, we have a working group, we have some experts, but how we intend to work with these experts in the working group and the simulation.
Sure. So we will have some, as part of the call for expression of interest, there will be a call for EDI experts to participate in the program to not only look after the content of the simulation and making sure that they are representative of the diversity of the different clinical situations the students may face, but also they will look after making sure that when we design the program for students, it's also an accessible, inclusive program to be able to attract students who may be members of underrepresented groups to make sure that they are also specifically included in this program as well.
Thank you, Florence. Any plan for virtual sim for the personal support worker area?
So as I mentioned earlier, as part of this program, we stay within the 3 areas: the paramedicine, medical technician lab, and lab technology and nursing. Just one second. Homeschooling is always... Sorry about that. That being said, CICan is also involved in a national program on the long-term care sector for PSW, and we recently created a national micro-certificate program for supportive care assistants. You may have seen a news release came out this morning, actually, to officially launch the availability of that program. So as part of this micro certificate program, we have integrated a simulation, and this program is available to all of our member colleges and institutes who wish to deliver it as part of their programming, but not specifically on this project. We do want to, make bridges between the different initiatives we are part of. So we want to make sure that we share best practices and share information from one project to another. So there will be some linkages that will happen as part of the development of this project.
Just add to it, because it relates as well to the question that came up earlier about whether other areas. I think someone asked about physiotherapy, and I think that's one of the things that we would really like to see come out of this project in terms of a long term. It's a 1-year project. There might be opportunities to renew the project, but I think the fundamental sort of value of this is bringing together a community like the one we see in front of our screens this morning, to think about how they can collaborate to create resources that everyone shares. And so if, I'm assuming that institutions are making independent investments either in face-to-face simulation facilities and all sorts of different educational resources, especially as you try to move so many of your programs online or support your students during the remainder of the pandemic. And if we can create sort of a community of practice and a sort of a platform or a way of working together I think that that can continue to thrive, I hope, well beyond the life of the project and the funding that's coming from the federal government, if it proves to be an effective, efficient way of working together. So in some ways, the question of what comes next will be up to the people who participate and the people who take advantage of the simulations that this has created.
Thank you. I have 3 questions that are linked to the EOI, so I'm just going to ask all of them together. So Carrie-Anne is asking how many educators per school we are looking in the EOI. Sofia is asking when the AOI will be out. And finally, Denise is asking if in the EOI process, if we will need capacity details on what type of simulation, for example, linear, exploratory, branching, the example that Tim gave.
Okay, so on the process for the EOI, we will be sending it out before the end of the month, so that's the plan. And how many educators? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so there's different possibilities for you to be involved in. So you can nominate several individuals per institution to take part in the program, and I think we have a line to say that you can nominate up to 9 or 10 individuals in your institution to take part in the program. And
I think it's important to note that you could also nominate as few as 1. If you wanted one person to be involved in just one of the professions working groups, then that's fine too.
Absolutely, absolutely. It will be open. You can apply for block 1 and 2 and 3, or just 1 or just 2, just 3. It's a flexible process, but we will analyze all of the proposal based on what you apply for. Christine, did you want to add?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
So the
to
third
answer the
one,
question about capacity and type of virtual simulation, the simulations to be developed and which type of simulation would be most appropriate for each of those will be determined by the working groups after schools are recruited. So know that we won't need that information in the RFP or in the EOI, sorry.
There's a question about the overall funding received from the federal government. So we mentioned earlier that we are not yet authorized to publicly announce the project yet. So it will soon be the case. So we will do a proper news release, as well as we will come up with a new web page on our website. So we cannot yet reveal the full amount that was received and all of the details about the project. But on the call for expression of interest, we will detail the available funding that each institution can receive, as well as within the RFP, we will also disclose the funding available for the development of the simulations.
But there is funding earmarked for faculty release, and there is funding earmarked for production costs of the scenarios themselves.
And this will all be detailed on the call.
Yeah, Kim has a similar question, which was how much release time can an educator expect within this project? So that will be detailed in the EOI. Yeah. Thank you.
There was another question from Louise asking about in putting the simulations together. Will patients be involved? I think the answer to that will depend on the people who are developing the simulations, but Ms. Laurence mentioned earlier, the members of the working group will each individually sort of take the lead on developing, probably about 2 simulations per person. And we're imagining that when you're doing that, you're going to be drawing on your own network, your colleagues in your institution, consulting your students, consulting the clinical partners, employers, and certainly involving patients in that discussion as well. I don't think there's any limit or prohibition on any of that, but it will come down to what do you need and what can you reasonably do in the time available. And Tim will know more about sort of the actual process of developing the simulations, what's typically involved in terms of an approach.
I would say it's not yet a standard practice to involve patients, but it's certainly an emerging practice. And Louise, I'm not surprised to get a good question like that from you. I think there could be benefit to involving patients, but is there a centrally like PAN project effort to make sure patients are involved in every single one? Not at this point, no.
I think the EDI experts, the equity, diversity, inclusion, we've also looking at accessibility, and we're looking at decolonization or sort of reconciliation objectives. I think those people will bring a number of different perspectives, from a patient perspective to the development of the individual scenarios.
Could a provincial educator group submit an EOI rather than a post-secondary institution?
So what do we call by provincial educator group?
Maybe CICan, you can take the floor and explain a little bit more.
Hi, good morning, or sorry, afternoon. I just meant provincial simulation groups, as opposed to that have individuals, educators from a diversity of schools across a province versus.
Like, are you with the eSIM program, CICan?
No, I'm with WEXI, Western Canada, a collaborative of health science educators.
Oh, okay.
I'm just curious.
And
for those of my partners on the call, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just wondering.
So the model in which we've built the project is with individual institutions. It's an interesting question, though. I think it's the first time this came across, and we want to make sure that the funding goes out to publicly supported colleges, institutes, and universities. So I don't know if you're working with publicly supported institutions.
Oh yeah, no, I am working with an institution. I see with regards to the release time, you want that money to go to publicly funded institutes. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Another question from Denise: is the Canadian Patient Safety Institute involved or could be?
So as you know, the Canadian Patient Safety Institute just amalgamated with the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement and launched as Healthcare Excellence Canada. We have strong relationships with them. Because this project focuses primarily on the level of education as opposed to system level patient safety improvement, we haven't approached them to be involved. Not to say that simulation doesn't have tremendous opportunities for that system level improvement, but that's beyond the scope of this project.
Thank you, Tim.
Sorry, it's Louise from HSO. Could I just butt in here?
Of course.
Hi, everybody. I think, Tim, and I think I've sent that to you before, but the CPSI has built curriculum-based patient safety curriculum for education, not for healthcare delivery, but education. That came out, I think, in 2019. I can push that back to you and Christine. And so maybe not just getting them engaged directly, but maybe following with those domains that were actually very well done.
Yeah, so the safety competencies, which were renewed maybe even more recently than 2019, could certainly inform the cases, as could the interprofessional competencies that were published by the Canadian CIHC, Canadian Interprofessional Healthcare Collaborative. Yes, they certainly could.
Russell's asked a question about research ethics approvals for the project. And it's certainly something that we would be conscious of, but I think that in terms of developing educational resources, or even, you know, putting in place a plan for a clinical placement, that this, I don't think it would be classified as research per se, but we'd certainly take advice on that, and would want to seek, you know, seek to make sure that we're respecting the TCPS2.
Thank you for answering, Christine. Yes, I think we covered all the questions in the chat right now. Does anyone want to ask a question? You can open your microphone.
I actually have a question for the group, and I'm curious to see if any of you are already using virtual simulation, and if you have any preliminary recommendations or consideration you would like to share. Russell?
Hello. Yeah, at Conestoga College, we do quite a bit of work in developing in-house simulations for a range of uses for learners. But again, I mean, there's so many places to go on that. We've accumulated our experiences, and myself and my colleagues in our VAR lab, we're happy to share any ideas or learnings as possible.
Very good, thank you.
So Tammy is mentioning that they just did a study on pivoting to virtual simulation at their school, and are in the process of writing it up. So I believe, Tammy, you're mentioning the evaluation of this process.
Right. So the one that we just finished, we actually did a survey of our students to see, you know, what their experience has been and how they felt that they were being prepared for the clinical, because we have not been able really to go into clinical that much, as everybody knows. We just, and forgive me, but I'm over 60 and I can't remember anything. So we just finished identifying our themes, and we've got some basic demographics and some stats that are just very little small ones, but the thematic analysis has been very interesting. So we're in the process of writing that up to hopefully be published. So I can, you know, when the time comes, I can certainly share it with this group, because I think it speaks to what the expectation is around vSim for us going into the future, right? We're all very hopeful that it's going to be good, but, you know, we also have to go back to our stakeholders and assure that.
We'd certainly be interested in hearing more about that as soon as you've got anything to share, Tammy. I think the evaluation and your previous comment about evaluation requiring an REB approval, there's certainly been a lot of interest expressed as we've sort of done our consultations, and using this as a really interesting sort of beyond the funders' requirements for an evaluation of the success vis-a-vis their objectives. Sort of looking at it in a more holistic sense in terms of the use of virtual simulation generally in clinical practice. We're interested in the idea of using this project as the basis for some research that would certainly, you know, open up the whole. We would want a proper research protocol and methodology, etc. We're also very conscious of not trying to bite off more than we can chew. I think we're fairly close to getting to that point already, but we're really interested in it, and I know that there are many people interested in it. So talking to someone like your group who has already done that. Which school are you at?
I'm with Nipissing University in Ontario. Yeah. The
Excellent.
other thing that, you know, all of us who've been in simulation a long time have talked about is the idea that we want to be able to justify the use of simulation rather than clinical time, right? So we really want to be able to do that. And what's the ROI on simulation? We've talked about this many times at Sim1 conferences, even before it became Simulation Canada. So I think this, you know, if we're given this opportunity to do something across the country, then why wouldn't we? Right? If not right away, then sort of start planting the seeds to do that and move in that direction. Because I really think we need to, you know, we want to bring simulation fully into the fold. And I think this is a part of a way to do it. And I'll get off my soapbox now because that's been my soapbox for years.
It's been, and you know, so I think it's important to make it clear as well that in terms of the scope of this project and our objectives, it's to create resources for educators to, you know, assist their students in becoming competent. And we're not, the project is not aimed at changing the way that clinical placements are organized, about requirements. We're you know, that's for the group that uses them to take on, but that's not the objective here at all. It's to create resources for educators to use. We realize there's lots of questions that it opens up, and that hopefully it feeds into conversations, as you say, have been going on for a long time, but we're not trying to change those parameters in any way as part of this project.
That's great. Great to hear. I'm interested in changing those parameters, so I'm up for research on that.
Go for it.
Thank you. So I see that Amanda has mentioned that they use RISE and Storyline. So Amanda, if you want to talk a little bit more about that, you are welcome to take the floor.
Sure, we've been using RISE and Storyline for our clinical, or actually for our simulation replacements, because we haven't been able to be in the simulation lab, as well as for clinical replacement at times. And this is for British Columbia Institute of Technology in BC. They've been working pretty well. It took a little bit of time for us to orient to the process of what worked best in terms of transferring our in-person scenarios to be virtual. So that was a bit tricky with adjusting the learning outcomes. But it's been going well, and we've been receiving some good feedback. Lots to learn still, but it's been a rewarding process to know that we have it available.
Great, thanks so much. We're almost done. I will give the floor to Carrie-Anne for maybe a last intervention, and then give it back to you, Florence, for closing the webinar.
Thanks very much. We collaborated with CanSim and developed one of their simulation, or used their technique to develop a simulation, which we are studying. And I do agree with Tammy. I hope that maybe the working groups, although I get that this project is around you know, creating resources for educators, hopefully the conversations will start amongst those educators across the country to study this, because that will really push things forward. But I do have to say, what I did love about CanSim's process, and I think is important, having done simulation with both postgrad, like basically people who post-licensure and pre-licensure, boy, I couldn't get that out. The difference between that is that students need context. And I think we miss the boat if we don't stick to the authenticity in the development. Tim, you were speaking about how certain simulations don't have to be as or maybe in depth, but I do think authenticity and context is so important for that pre-licensure student. I'm working with students, a student group right now, and it's so different doing sim with pre-licensure versus post-licensure. And so I think in the development of virtual simulations, it should be a thought anyway, that to keep that authenticity and context first and foremost in the development. And we're doing a study as well on the sim that we created. So I can hopefully share those, or it'll be disseminated at some point.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Carrie-Anne, for your comments and remarks. We are reaching the end of our session today, and we are so appreciative of your time, your interest, all your questions, and we thank you very much for attending this session. Again, there will be some news coming up. We will make this presentation and the recorded session available to you as well. So we have all of your contact information, and as part of this presentation, we also share our contact information. So if you have any questions in the meantime, before the release of the call for expressions of interest or RFP, don't hesitate to contact us. Again, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great weekend ahead.
Thank you, Florence, Tim, and Christine, and everyone.